Testing stream 1-4. Testing stream 1-4.
Would you gavel? Hit it. Good morning. The Finance Committee will please come to order. Any citizens wishing to address the committee? There being none, we'll move to item 3, which is approval of the minutes from the prior meeting. Entertain a motion.
Move approval.
We have a motion by Mr. Bose, second by Mr. Zimmerman. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. We'll now hand the gavel over to Mr. Chairman Powell to convene the board committee. The board, sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. Today I guess the first order of business is we will actually open a public hearing at this particular time. And as Chairman of the Board of Managers, I open this public hearing today at 10:10 a.m. as required by Chapter 298B of the Texas Health and Safety Code to consider only the following 3 issues: the amounts of any mandatory payments that the Board of Managers intends to require a provider participant to make, and how the revenue derived from those mandatory payments is to be spent. It also sets the amount of mandatory payments for the fiscal year ending in 2020 at a percentage of net patient revenue of an institutional health care provider located in Tarrant County Hospital District's geographic judicial area. There are 6 members of the Board of Managers present at this time, therefore we have a quorum. I would also like to ask, is there anyone signed in to speak at this public hearing? I've been advised there are none. Then there being none, we would then move and the next item, and I will close this public hearing at 10:15 a.m. this morning. Thank you in that regard. I will now move to consider the proposed resolution regarding setting the mandatory provider agreements and how revenue derived from those payments is to be spent under the Tarrant County Local Provider Participation Program. Each of you has been provided a copy of the resolution prepared by General Counsel with the recommendation of the President and the CEO for your consideration. We certainly would entertain any discussion at this time. If there is no discussion, I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion. Move that the Board of Managers, based on the recommendation of Robert Early, President and CEO of the Tarrant County Hospital District, with the advice of Neil Adams, General Counsel of the Tarrant County Hospital District, approve the resolution that 1, authorizes the collection of mandatory payment from each institutional health care provider located in the hospital district. 2, authorizes the use of funds collected through mandatory payments for the purposes specified in Chapter 298B, Texas Health and Safety Code, and 3, sets the amount of the mandatory payments for the fiscal year ending in 2020 at 1.51% of the net patient revenue of an institutional health care provider located in the Tarrant County Hospital District's geographic jurisdictional area as set forth on Exhibit A. Wow, I'd memorized that. I just, off the top of my head.
Okay.
And Exhibit A is also attached to that resolution that was posted on the website for your review.
There being a motion on the floor, I'd entertain a second. I have a second. Dr. Weber, all those in favor saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. It carries. I will now move to agenda item 5C regarding authorization of the President and CEO to make intergovernmental transfers, what's known as IGTs, from the Local Provider Participation Fund. If there's any discussion, we would add that at this time. If not, I'd consider a motion for approval of that item. I have a motion by Mr. Petty, second by Mr. Zimmerman. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Carries. At this particular point in time, that will basically conclude that action items we had, and we will now move to agenda item number 6, which is a report from our auditor. And I think Mr. Chris Clark from BKD is here. And Chris, if you'd come up and present that report to us. The floor is all yours.
Go from LPPS to financial statement.
Hey, what? It's a fun morning.
That's what we live for.
Speaking of fun, here comes Sharon. She wants to get in.
Here you go.
Oh, it's good. Well, for those that I haven't met, my name is Chris Clark. I'm an audit partner with BKD, and we're here today to present the results of the financial statement audit for fiscal year ending September 30, 2019. In your materials, you've got two documents. The first is a draft of the audit report that includes the financial statements, the footnotes, and BKD's opinion on the financial statements. And then you've also got a letter that goes through in some detail all of the things that audit standards require that we communicate to the governing body of the organization that we're working with. As I've have in years past, I've summarized these items on the screen, and so I'll walk through each of these as we go along. Feel free to stop me and ask any questions that you might have. I want to start by going through the required communication, then I'll share with you some historical financial statement results and some key ratios for you to consider, and then I'll wrap up with just a few brief comments on a couple of new accounting standards that will be impacting your organization, and as well as a couple of industry-related comments. The first thing to note is that we're prepared to issue an unmodified opinion on your financial statements. We are in draft form today to give the board an opportunity to hear our report, but we are complete with our audit procedures. If the board moves forward with approving the report as presented, then we'll be in a position to finalize our report, which will just involve removing that draft stamp. We are issuing an unmodified opinion. That means that BKD is providing a reasonable level of assurance that the financial statements are accurate and complete, and that the footnotes also contain all the information that a user of the financial statements would need to know in order to better understand the financial position of the organization and the current year financial statement results. In the process of doing the financial statement audit, we also completed a grant compliance audit, which is required by the federal and state governments given the level of grant funding from those entities that you receive. We've also completed that audit and had no findings as it relates to grant compliance. There were no question costs that we identified, and so you can consider that report to be clean as well. I've also noted at the bottom of the slide here that we received all the cooperation and assistance from the management team here at JPS, the finance team, and all those involved in conducting the audit. It's an involved process. It takes a lot of time and attention from your team here. We received all the cooperation that we feel like that we should have received and are very appreciative of that cooperation throughout the process. I want to identify for you two things. One are the most significant accounting estimates that you have in your financial statements, which we consider to be the most significant risk areas. And then I also wanted to call out the key financial statement disclosures that are included in your financial statements. On the estimate side, these are consistent with prior periods, and it includes your allowances for uncollectible accounts and contractual adjustments on patient accounts receivable, estimates associated with supplemental Medicaid funding, which, as you know, has become a very material part of your operations here. A lot of moving parts associated with those programs, and the rules seem to change on a fairly regular basis. And so as partner on the engagement, this is where I tend to spend a lot of my time because the numbers are so material to your financial statements and the programs are so complex. The next item is your reserve for self-insured risk. You're self-insured for medical malpractice claims, for employee health claims, and workers' compensation claims. And then lastly, your net pension liability. On the financial statement disclosure side, as I mentioned, the materiality of the Medicaid reimbursement programs, because they are so important to the financial results of the organization. You'll notice 2 or 3 pages of disclosures related to the various programs that you participate in and how those programs operate. And then the next 2 items there, the defined benefit pension plan and property tax revenue, and how that supports your organization and the manner in which that revenue is recognized. I would also say that these are consistent with prior years and also consistent with your peers in the industry. We work with a number of the other county hospitals in the state of Texas, and so these aren't unique to you, but are in some ways unique to the state of Texas. In terms of adjustments to the financial statements, we propose no adjustments that were recorded that impacted the net income for fiscal year 19. As we have in years past, we did propose some balance sheet reclassifications for external reporting purposes, but no adjustments that changed net position or changed your excess of revenues over expenses. We did have one adjustment that we identified related to patient revenue that ultimately wasn't recorded due to overall immateriality. I want to move now into some...
Is that the $3.2 million that you...
Yes, sir.
Now, what was
Yeah.
So that relates to, you have patients that come into the organization that participate in the JPS Connection program. Those patients may be seen by a claim, and JPS Connection pays those patients, pays a claim for seeing those patients. Subsequent to that payment, those patients might receive coverage through Medicaid or some other third party. When those payments come in, a claim repays JPS Connection for the payments that they initially received on those patient accounts, and there was a timing issue related to when those transfers occurred and when they were recorded in the financial statements, and that's what it relates to.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Sure. As we go through some of the historical financial statement information and some of the key ratios, I've got some industry comparisons, and in the district averages, I've included these districts, and I've included this slide just to give you a sense of how you compare to the other large districts in the state from a size perspective. Obviously, there's certainly differences in the markets, differences in who has borrowed money to do replacement facilities and things of that nature. So that's why you see some of those differences between total assets and total debt. If you think about it from an operational perspective, I would focus in on the revenue column. That gives you probably the best perspective of the size of those organizations as compared to JPS. If you look at the total admissions column, the revenues might not sync up with those admissions because there looks like there's a lot of consistency in the admissions as compared to revenues. This is just total inpatient admissions, so it would include all outpatient business. There's also, it doesn't include outpatient, and then there's also a difference in deliveries. So if you think about Parkland has 14,000 deliveries each year as compared to the 3,500 to 4,000 you might have at JPS. Those aren't reflected in those numbers. So that's why those admissions don't necessarily sync up with what you see in the revenue column. Right. These are just pure adult inpatient admissions, adult and pediatric.
Before you leave that, what is NPSR?
Net patient service revenue. So that number that you see there is the total of the revenue that you receive from various payers for providing services to patients, plus all the funding that you receive from the Medicaid UC, DSRIP, DISH, and those other supplemental funding programs.
So Chris, not putting words in your mouth here, because I would never do that to an auditor. But if you look at these numbers, and you got to say JPS is doing a whole lot more with a whole lot less money than any of our other public hospital colleagues. I mean, if you look at, of course, total debt's going to change. That won't be there. But if you look at total assets and you look at total admissions and you look at everybody else, our numbers are significantly different for the amount of people that we provide care to.
Certainly, if you look at adult and pediatric inpatient admissions, you're very comparable to organizations that are larger than you from a total assets and total debt perspective. Again, there's probably differences in the outpatient scope of business, deliveries, things of that nature that do create some differences. But if you look at Dallas and Bexar County in particular, those organizations, as you are aware, have done large bond issues to improve their facilities.
And does BKD do some of the work for these other facilities as well?
We audit all of these facilities.
Okay.
And so you're in a good position to say we're doing the best, right? No, I'm just kidding.
Is this being live streamed?
I just love to see an auditor actually smile, so thank you very much. That was the only goal I had.
Thank you.
Yeah. Exactly.
What he was trying to say is the chair of the finance committee was really
All of
doing
these organizations do
spectacular.
great work.
Well, and with all seriousness, though, when you have people like Dennis Keeley and other members of the community and people that live stream, Mr. Keeley and others know these numbers, and I think that's why JPS's reputation is strong and good in the community, because we do a lot with less numbers, and we work really hard to do that, and we're appreciative of our finance team and appreciative of the board to be able to do what we do with what we have.
The next slide I have for you is a summary of your balance sheet, and we've shown this for 5 years. A couple of things that I wanted to point out here. You do see a growth in total cash and investments, and this is noted in your management's discussion and analysis in the audit report. There's about a 25% increase in total cash and investments year over year. A big portion of that, about $70 million of that growth, is related to the LPPF fund. So you hold that cash, and it's reflected in your balance sheet as restricted. If you strip that out, you did have about a 12% growth, which is approximately $66 million growth in total unrestricted cash and investments year over year. And you'll see that in the growth in your days cash on hand in a subsequent slide. In terms of that Medicaid receivable line, you'll notice back in 2015, you had a receivable of $137 million. It's stabilized over the last few years as the timing of payments from DISH and UC and DISRIP have become more routine and more predictable. One of the biggest changes that we noticed when we started our risk assessment process was that reduction in patient accounts receivable from $63 million last year down to $52 million this year. You'll see that here as well. A pretty dramatic decrease in the total number of days it takes on average to adjudicate a patient claim. When we see changes like this, the first thing we think is that there's some potential valuation issue. So if we had seen it increase significantly, we would think there could be some potential overstatement of patient accounts receivable, with the contrast being true for a drop. Here it really is just improved revenue cycle operations. We saw material changes in the gross amount of accounts receivable that existed at year-end, a reduction in unbilled accounts, a lot of variables like that changed that improved the timing with which patient accounts were collected. So very good change.
And the green star, that's the average?
So the average, the red line and the blue line are, as you can see there, the average for Moody's rated hospitals and AA3 rated hospitals. That green dot represents the average for the most recent fiscal year end for the districts that are in your peer group, correct. So, and that includes the JPS number of 40 days, so it's actually bringing that down. So if you pull the JPS number out, it's actually a little bit higher. And some of that's payer mix driven. Some of it is related to different programs that those organizations might have in terms of payments that are received from uninsured patients. But really, you know, you should be proud of that reduction that you see. That really is just rolling your sleeves up and improving the process.
Well, if, the board members need to understand, and as we make changes on the administrative team, and you all have told me, you know, keep us apprised of that. When we brought Rory McCready in, Rory's emphasis and compliments to Sharon, but when we brought Rory in and we brought Laura Thomas in as 2 new vice presidents into finance, we put a focus on that. And Rory's sitting in the back and Laura's on the second row, and they are not those to wave their hands and talk about the accolades that they're doing, but those numbers are directly reflective of the work of both of those people. And that's a huge asset to the team, and I'm proud of their work.
I've audited a lot of hospitals over the years, and very rarely do I see a drop that large in 1 year, so it's a pretty significant change.
Good luck next year, Rory. But we're real proud of you this year. Real proud of you. Yeah.
Yes, it's very low hanging.
But we'll go with it.
A couple of other things I wanted to point out on your balance sheet. You'll see a growth in current liabilities there. If you look at the detailed balance sheet, you'll see that $70 million of that growth is in the LPPF. So if you've got $70 million roughly of LPPF funds, you've got a roughly $70 million liability that offsets that. So that's the increase in current liabilities. Everything else on the balance sheet has stayed relatively the same. Your equity position has increased from $811 million back in 2015 to $855 million in 2019. That's about a 5% increase in total equity over the span of that 5 years. I mentioned earlier the growth in cash and investments, and you can see here your total days cash on hand, which is the number of days that you could operate on the existing cash balances that you have, increased from 198 days back in 2018 up to 212 days in 2019. And you can see there your comparisons to the industry, higher than the average for the districts. That number is being driven down in part by El Paso, that operates with much less cash and investments than you have. There's also differences too in terms of timing. So Harris County is a February 28th fiscal year end, so you can imagine the timing of property tax revenue receipts. Their cash balances are at a peak at that time, whereas you're reporting just before your property tax revenue starts to come in, so at the lowest cash position. So there is some differences there that impact that average, but certainly some positive growth that you see in the current year. Any organization that has a defined benefit plan, I think it's important that you evaluate on a routine basis the funded status of that plan, and that's not been an issue here. You can see you're almost 100% funded. It did drop a little bit from last year, primarily related to investment returns, but still a very strong funded status, higher than the S&P average, and then certainly higher than the other districts in your peer group.
I'd like to make one comment, if I may. I mean, this looks awful good compared to other entities that we deal with, where they are on their pension stuff, like the city. Let me rephrase it.
Go ahead, you're in the hole, keep digging.
Yeah, okay, I'll be quiet.
S&P average that you see there are S&P rated hospitals. So like if you were to broaden this out to other municipalities that have defined benefit plans, to your point, I think that percentage would come down some. Here's a look at a comparison of cash to debt, and I show this because I just think it's important for you to get a sense of how you compare to other hospitals in terms of your borrowing strategy. Other hospitals, and you can see in the Moody's and district comparisons, they may have more cash, but they've also borrowed more to maintain those levels of cash, whereas historically your capital expenditures have come almost solely from cash that you've generated from operations. As you move forward with your plans here, this number will change, and you'll probably look more consistent with the industry. The green bar there, again, is the average for the other districts in the state who have essentially what that number represents is the ratio of their cash to debt. If they had the same level of cash as you did, that's how much debt that they would have, if that makes sense. So you'll see those cash bars are equal to just over $600 million. Based on the average debt load that those hospitals carry, that would mean that at $600 million of cash, they have over $400 million of debt. Here's your income statement, and you can see certainly an improvement in the bottom line as compared to the last few years. You reported a $3 million loss in 2018 as compared to a $33 million net income for 2019. You had about a 5% increase in net patient service revenue, which was volume driven. There's also some impact from the Europe program and things like that. One thing you might notice in that other revenue line is an increase from $57 million in 2018 to $76 million this year. That relates in large part to an expansion of your 340B program, and use of contract pharmacies is related to that program. That's a big difference there. And then your property tax revenue increased from $380 million in 2018 to $414 million in 2019. Then that increase that you see in the non-operating revenue from $11 million in 2018 up to $19 million in 2019 is almost entirely related to investment return. Better rates of return and increased cash balances led to that result.
Does that include the claim, Chris?
These are all consolidated. One ratio that we look at when we're evaluating your revenue and patient accounts receivable is cash collections to net revenue. So we want to make sure over an extended period of time that you're collecting all of the revenue that you're recording in the financial statements. So in each year, you'll see a delta between cash collections and net revenue, but over a 3 to 5 year time horizon, you would expect that to be around 100%. You'll see in 2019, those cash collections exceeded net patient service revenue, and that's a product of that change that you saw in patient accounts receivable. You collected more of what was outstanding that related to a prior period, so cash collections in the current year exceeded the revenue that was recorded.
We're catching up.
Catching up, right. So if you look at this 5 year period, you're just over 100% for the full 5 years. And then the last financial slide I have for you is property tax revenue. The bars show you the total dollar amounts of property tax revenue, and then the percentages represent the amount of support that represents to the organization. So if you look at the total of revenue from operations plus property tax revenue, the percentage represents the ratio of the property tax revenue to that total. So essentially 38% of your total revenue comes from property taxes. It's compared to 30% over in Dallas, 50% in Houston, 31% in San Antonio, and then 14% in El Paso. These are relatively consistent with prior periods. Any questions on any of the numbers that I've shared before I wrap things up? A couple of things I wanted to point out to you. There's a couple of new accounting standards that will impact you in the coming years. GASB statement number 87, which will be effective for fiscal year 21, is a lease standard that will require all lease commitments be reflected in your balance sheet. So no matter the type of lease, you'll record a lease liability and a lease asset on your balance sheet. The impact to the bottom line will probably not be significant, but it will certainly change the way your balance sheet looks, and it will cause growth overall in your balance sheet. And then as you embark on a building project, it's important to note GASB 89, which removes the ability of you to capitalize interest. So historically, during a project period, any interest that you incurred on the debt for that project could be capitalized as part of the project cost and then depreciated over the life of the building. Now, any interest cost that's incurred during the building period has to be expensed. Right.
Say again, Steve?
In addition to the life of the building.
So basically, all interest expense that you incur gets expensed in the year that it's incurred, rather than during the construction period capitalizing that interest cost as part of the project and then depreciating it over a longer life. Okay. So it essentially, under the old standard, you could defer some interest expense, and that gets recognized over a longer period of time. In subsequent years, this just results in all interest expense being recognized in the period that it's incurred.
We're not planning on capitalizing interest, are we?
Well, from a financing perspective, that's different. This is just from a pure accounting perspective. Historically, even if you weren't borrowing the interest cost, as you incurred that interest cost during the construction period, you considered it as part of the cost of the asset, right, versus recognizing it as interest expense in your income statement.
So it's just a generic statement.
Yeah.
It's not intended to suggest that we plan on.
Right, exactly. Right. Yeah.
There's no lease.
Yeah.
In the lease piece, that won't materially impact us, will it? I mean, we don't lease a lot of.
It won't, it will on the balance sheet, so your assets and liabilities will both go up, and it's a lot of work to get to that number. So it's a big deal from an accounting perspective, but from a user perspective, it probably
It won't.
In it doesn't include just leased buildings, so if you lease copiers or any clinical equipment of that nature, all of that has to be considered. Keeps all us accountants in business.
Accountant full employment.
Yeah. The last slide I have for you is just a couple of highlights that I think are hot buttons for the industry right now, particularly in Texas. As you're aware, the UC pool is transitioning to a charity care cost approach for fiscal 20, the year that we're in right now. Historically, there were other costs that could be considered in the allocation of that pool. Beginning in fiscal 20, it's based solely on the charity care costs that you incur, and essentially the ratio of the charity care costs that you incur as compared to the rest of the state. So that's going to be a benefit, I believe, to your organization, but it's shifting some funding around the state. And then the DSRIP program, which has become a very material part of a lot of hospital operations, is phasing out. The funding is being reduced, and then by fiscal 22, there will be no funding associated with the DSRIP program. I believe that the state continues to evaluate some alternatives to replace that program, but we don't know what that's going to look like today. And then the last thing here is just something I think to keep your eye on. It's the Medicaid Fiscal Accountability Rule that came out. It's a proposed rule that came out a few weeks back, which essentially criticizes supplemental funding programs and the nature in which those are funded. You just passed your LPPF. Those types of arrangements are things that this rule appears to be taking a look at. It has implications in Texas, but it also has implications all over the country because there's those type of programs everywhere. We don't know where this is going to go, but it's something that it's important to watch.
Hey, Robert, can we, maybe it's next finance committee, not this one, but can we have an item on the agenda to talk about what we think is going to happen with this RIP and the down of dollars that we, at this point in time, would be losing relative to termination
You bet.
of this RIP funding and what our plan would be to replace that?
Yes.
Or change it, or whatever?
You bet.
I mean,
And what proposed other items?
it's a huge amount of money.
That's correct.
So
Still
understanding.
substantial amount of dollars out there
Yeah.
somewhere.
It's timely to figure that out. Sharon and I, Mike Spivey and Corey Goldman went down to the state and met with HHSC and talked about some of those funding choices and some of the plans they have. Some of the, candidly, some of the confusion they may have of what they're trying to do and where they're trying to go and what they're going to try to replace it with. I just turned my mic off. No, it's just a matter of trying to figure out where they're going and what they're doing. So yeah, I think it would be timely to give you all an update with what we know. There'll be some gaps in that, but we'll be happy to.
Good, thank you.
May we also get a short presentation on the 340B program, if we may?
You bet.
That's all I had for you. Any other questions that I can answer?
Chris has a nice little summary in his draft document under supplemental Medicaid funding revenue that talks about the DSRIPs and how things are funded and tentatively where they're going. Since I don't deal with it daily, it was a nice thing to read. Thank you.
Any questions for Chris? Well, Chris, you said before us the last 3 or 4 years, that's an awful good report. And I commend the finance department and the management and all that good stuff. Those numbers are very impressive. I know our finance chair will take credit for all that, and we certainly want to give him his due, but, and seriously, Robert, to you and the staff and to the finance, those numbers don't just happen. So again, Chris, thank you so very much.
Thank you.
I do appreciate, Mr. Chair, how BKD does their business at JPS. You are in no way unfair. You in no way give us any privileges, but you understand the organization. And your working relationship with Sharon is positive because there's nuances, as you know, if you've seen one public hospital, you've seen one public hospital. And there are going to be things that we do differently, and your willingness to learn that is appreciative. And your willingness to question us is welcome, But I will tell you, board members and the community listening, that BKD is hard and difficult on us, and BKD does a good job because you learn. You are not cookie cutter at all, and that's what we ask.
Yeah.
Thank you. We appreciate the opportunity to work with you.
Good, Chris. If there's no additional questions for Chris, at this particular time, I will need a motion to accept the report as presented.
I'd like to make that motion,
I have a motion by Mr. Montgomery. I have a second by Mrs. DeBose. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Chris, thank you. Again, thank you very,
Have a
very
good day.
much. Next item be item number 7. And the first one, I'm going to ask Pia to come up, consider approval of subsequent policy period offer between American Insurance and Tarrant County Hospital District. Pia, how are you doing?
Good, fine. How are you doing?
Floor is
this
all
morning?
yours, Ms. Walker.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. This morning, I would like to ask for your approval between Unamerica Insurance Company and Tarrant County Hospital District for our stop-loss insurance. The cost for this insurance policy is $1.3 million. It is included in our FY20 budget. McGriff, Siebels, and Williams is our consultant for our benefits, and they did go out to bid with various A-rated stop-loss carriers. And Unamerica did provide us with the best cost and price for the organization. There is a 5.6% increase, which is approximately $70,000, which is due to participants being put into the cover policy. So at this time, I would like to ask for your approval for this contract.
Any discussion at this time for Pia? If not, we entertain a motion. I have a motion by Mr. Wynn, second by Mrs. DeBose. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Thank you so very much. Thank you, Pia. Appreciate it very much. Now I'd like to ask Mr. Kenny Carr to come up on item number 7B, approval of license and support agreement between Siemens Medical and Tarrant County Hospital.
Good morning.
Kenny, good morning.
Good morning. I would like to offer for your consideration, this is an agreement between Siemens and Tarrant County Hospital District. This is for the software called Singo Via, an enterprise solution that allows us to do the 3D rendering. It's going to allow us to process the images much quicker for our physicians and clinical staff to utilize, and it also is going to have an improvement on the brain perfusion piece of this for our stroke patients. It'll also allow us to do something that our physicians are asking for, and that is having a remote viewing station so that they can see the images as fast as our techs do. And this is for a 8-year agreement.
Yes, Mr. Bose.
Question on the 8 years. Why would we normally have 3 and 5, so why are we going to 8 on this? And
Well, there's a couple of, good question, there's a couple of reasons. One of them is that this piece of equipment will last us greater than probably approximately
Kenny, can you pull that closer, please?
Pull your
Pull a
mic
little
closer.
This piece of equipment will last greater than approximately 10 to 12 years. And this is the type of software that is unique to this vendor. And we locked in a price that was extremely competitive.
so for 8 years, you got a cheaper annual, because I just saw the first year, and then from then on, it was the same for the next 8. I just have a problem with 8 years. I mean, I think that technology change, I even know the equipment we say might last, there might be some changes and stuff.
You know what, that's a good question. So one of the things that we do is that, built into this would be the upgrades associated with that with that software. So, there's no other types of software that we currently have that would actually run that pieces of equipment.
It scared me when I see 8 years. It looks like they're building up the total contract value for sale. And that's the problem that I have. So
Say again?
usually when you have that length of the contract, they're gearing up for the total contract value of the agreement, and usually they're getting ready for a spin-off or sold, to be sold.
Siemens is a big.
No, but they can spin off the division. This is not.
From sell-off of the long-term agreement. I agree, DT. But Kenny, you indicated that any and all upgrades of that software are covered in the base price of this. Okay.
So what would have been the difference if this would have been a traditional for 3-5?
Gotten as good a deal, sir, Potentially.
How much different there would have been?
I'm not sure.
We're talking hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands?
Nah, I don't think it would have been, I don't know the answer to that, sir. Because we went for the best deal as possible. And we worked directly with supply chain, David and his group, to make sure that we had the best and very competitive pricing. Busy.
Wait till the next meeting so that we can get those numbers, or is it critical to have it?
Well, sir, so we're putting in our new CTs right now. The first one's going to be in next week. They'll be here. It's going to be very difficult to run that piece of equipment.
But you could still buy it, but it doesn't mean that we have to have an 8-year contract. And I'm just, I read on the contract where for the first year, you paid more, and then it dropped down, and it stayed the same for the next 7 years. So I'm thinking that we aren't losing that much if we could change it to 5.
They might rebid it, though, if we
Well.
change the term. It might be more.
Our county would like to know that, so.
Can I ask you this? The CT's going in, will you have software to run the equipment as it sits in this district so we can utilize it? Would
The
you have an
software is very specific to that piece of
It's
equipment.
to that a piece of equipment. So the question is, we need the software in order to use our CT. You can't give us a comparative number, whether it's 8 years or 5 years, till you go back and get, like Steve just said, they could obviously go up on their bid. I mean, we don't know what that number is.
I would anticipate that they would, because lots of times you can get that, but I don't know the answer to that, sir.
Then-
We're looking at, I mean, to be fair here, it's like, the year one is 122,000, and subsequent years is 91,000. I mean, it's not gonna, the needle's not gonna move much on this, guys, even if we go to 5 years.
I don't think so.
I mean,
We're getting,
I don't see any reason why not to approve it as 8 years, especially if the term of the equipment is 8 to 12 years lifespan.
no, sir, we currently have one that's way greater than that. That's a Siemens product, but my understanding from an asset piece, it's usually 10 to 12 years.
10 to 12 years for the life of the
Sir.
hardware, so the
And we
software.
run these 24/7.
And this includes, support fees, includes upgrades.
Yeah.
God, I think we're squibbling over a small amount of money.
Yeah, Steve, that's why I asked the question. Upgrades are considered. The life of the equipment is, expectations are longer than the 8.
That is
We
correct,
don't
sir.
know whether we're talking about saving 20 or 200, but I doubt we're saving a huge amount based on what Steve just said, the differential. I agree. I don't disagree with what our discussion's been. It is longer than the normal leases we have approved in the institution, so I'm certainly,
So if I can speak to the estimated life of the
Right.
equipment, I was not personally negotiating the contract, but our materials management area did get in and look. We have software that kind of shows us, I've got one right here. We have software that shows us what other people pay for similar agreements, and this 8-year agreement over the term saves several $100,000. We could try to go back and negotiate, but one of the reasons for the 8-year term, we also wanted to make sure that the next item that Kenny's gonna be talking about for software, and so B and D, I believe, are both 8-year terms, and those needed to align to run this equipment.
You also have you have a 90-day early out in the contract. You can terminate for any reason, no cause.
There is for item B, I believe there is a cost for early termination, but it de-escalates as we move through that 8-year term.
Leo, can this be discussed in executive session?
Do what?
Sure.
certainly. If we need to take this.
Process of dealing with the specific terms of that contract. The board has a different
I would
view.
like to do that.
Then let's table this time. We'll discuss both items. Since I hear what you're saying, Sharon, 7B, the software that we're discussing that Kenny has presented under 7B has to run parallel with the 8-year contract that's on 7D. Is that correct? So we should discuss both those, then Kenny will, If that's the recommendation, Trent, that's what we'll do. Kenny, thank you very much.
Take it up after executive session.
Yeah, we'll do, yes, we certainly will.
Yeah.
Kenny, thank you very much. And by the way, item number 7C has been pulled, so we will discuss B and D in closed as a discussion.
7C.
C has been pulled. Gotcha. Kenny, thank you. Item number 8 on the agenda is our committee reports. Obviously, the one committee report we're going to address at this time is Human Resources, and I think Dorothy Pia is going to make a presentation. Is that
Presentation.
great? Pia, if you'd come up and key performance indicator scorecard. The floor is all yours, Pia.
I think this was in response to a question that Trent asked us at the last
Okay.
meeting.
Pia, floor.
Okay.
And
Floor's all
before,
yours, Bill. Go
before
ahead.
Pia starts, let me give you guys an update on what we're doing. Both Mr. Petty and Mr. Weber wanted to sort of take a look at what was happening in particular with executive turnover and where we've come with executive turnover, because our numbers are higher on the executive team and executive turnover. What we plan to do is give you an actual documented report. Mr. Petty raised the point that some of the people that may have had turnover had long tenure here and had opportunities to go to other organizations. That did happen. You also have a longer time frame by which we're looking at that over the years, what we've looked at. Last year, we did an executive restructure. We made some changes in the last year and a half. We had a chief strategy officer, not strategic officer. We had a chief strategy officer, and we no longer kept that position in the organization. We had a chief of staff. We no longer kept that position. So those were not individuals as much as reorganization of those positions. So we moved those on. We did look at changes in VP of Finance, and in the change of VP of Finance, we decided to take the individual who is our VP of Finance, and she had found another position, and we structured that to bring in Rev Cycle and a senior VP of Finance. So we did a restructure there as well, but we also made a change in the vice president. So what I'd like to do, Mr. Petty, if you will allow us, is to actually give you that documentation rather than any verbal comments I'd have.
Okay.
And I think we will have that prepared for you as we go through the process. It's a little bit challenging time-wise with what we're doing with AIP and third-year payouts and everything. So if you all don't mind, we will have that for our next HR committee. That's what we suggested to Ms. DeBose at the last HR committee. And we'll actually have a documentation for those of you and for the entire board to give you an idea of where those people are going and why the numbers are higher on the executive team of a turnover and some of those reasons for those turnovers. And I'm not necessarily pleased or disappointed. I think it's more a level of the facts of why some of those people are no longer in the organization, and in some cases, why those people didn't fit in the organization, or at least those positions did not fit. The chief of staff was an experiment, and that chief of staff is probably more fitting for other organizations than this one, and it didn't seem to actually in the long-term fit. We also had changes in our development officers, and we tried an experiment with development in that we hope we brought somebody in that would look at local development dollars and some that would look at national development dollars. The national development dollars did not really operate the way we wanted it to, so we made a change there. And then we took our vice president of communications and moved them into development and community affairs. So I'll document that along with arrows and color schemes and everything else, but you'll have that at the next HR committee, if I could ask for your indulgence, Mr. Petty, on that one.
Sure. When is that?
That was my clarification, because we will not have a board meeting in January. Therefore, I don't know if the committee meethes, and I will definitely have to check with the new.
26, I think.
January
is-
26th.
That's when
Yeah.
it'd be, yes. Because normally we have committees prior to
26th is
board.
Sunday.
In this case, it's the 26th. 23rd.
Here we go.
Guessing.
We decided to take HR to the church, and we're going to be meeting on Sundays for all of our HR.
We will
We
pray
need
for
a higher
that,
level,
yeah.
so we're meeting on Sundays
We
for
made some
HR now.
changes.
That-
We were gonna
and
meet
that would
at
be a
night
great
too.
thing.
Let's just make sure the new vice chair and
At
head of
lots of
HR knows when that committee is. It's the 23rd of,
January.
thank you very much. Trent, that's when we'll have that discussion.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. Tia,
Okay.
floor is yours. Thank you.
Yes, good morning, everyone, and thank you for allowing for me to present to you the Human Resources Dashboard on turnover by job class. And so one key thing for us to think about as we look at turnover within the organization, and this is something that I do discuss with my colleagues all the time, is that when we're looking at this data, we are benchmarking against Saratoga, which is a national benchmark with other healthcare organizations of how we arrive at the data that we look at for turnover. When we think about turnover, and just as Robert stated, turnover can consist in so many different ways. Turnover can be due to restructuring of departments. Turnover can be just natural attrition, which happens in organizations. And then at times, individuals do leave organizations due to personal reasons, due to family matters, and due to other opportunities that they do receive in other organizations. So turnover looks so many different ways and when we do look at organizations. For us here at JPS, turnover is very important because for us with that experience, we're wanting to ensure that we are onboarding team members appropriately when they come on board, and also making sure that they're the right fit for JPS. Key things that we need to think about when these individuals do come on board is that they do have the hearts for public service, that they do value the 3 rules that we have: own it, seek joy, and don't be a jerk. And at times, there are some people who just have an issue with following those 3 rules. So.
I see joy. Don't be a jerk.
And so there are times of when we think about it, is that when that turnover is occurring, that we are going to see at times those numbers, I would say, de-escalating, and then at times there's going to be spikes. One key thing that we do need to think about is that with JPS Health Network, we do have a 90-day probationary period. That is a time of when for team members, we want to ensure that this is the right fit for them, and that for leadership has hired the right individuals into the organization as well. So just to put that into perspective, there are so many different things that we do need to think about and that we do need to put in consideration when we do look at these numbers. For the upcoming year, and we're going to be bringing the information back to the Board of Managers in January, we're going to be looking at that 1 year of turnover for the organization, because for us, when we look at the 1 year, it's going to help with that voluntary turnover within the organization as well. So turnover is key for us, and it's just ensuring that we're hiring the right people who have the right hearts to be here at JPS Health Network. So let's take a look at the dashboard, and looking at this actual dashboard for us, again, we are benchmarking against Saratoga. And when we did look at voluntary turnover for the fiscal year ending in the 4th quarter, we did end the year at 13.37. Per Saratoga, the benchmark is 11.3, so we did score slightly higher, and we trended upward in that number. Just to let you know about a couple reasons of why we did see that turnover. The top 5 reasons for turnover in the fiscal year were voluntary turnover, were family personal reasons, individuals who were seeking career changes, other individuals who did seek other promotional opportunities, career advancement within other organizations. There was relocation. And then also, too, it was based on personal and family reasons of why they did leave the organization. So those are some of the top reasons of why we did see that trending data upward for overall turnover. As you can see, we did have this breakdown by job code. And some of those families, of course, based upon the position, some of those jobs are entry-level roles where you will see high turnover in those positions. But things that we do need to focus on is ensuring that for the upcoming years that we're going to focus on stay interviews to get feedback from team members, to ensure that they have a connection to the workforce, that they have a connection to their jobs, and that they feel that the work that they do is meaningful as well. And then one other thing, too, is looking at that 90-day turnover. That is key for us to focus on as well, and as you can see, within that 90 days, we did trend downward as an organization as well. So this is the report that I wanted to provide the board based on turnover. Are there any questions relating to this document and report?
Any questions for Pia? Dorothy, you want to add anything else? I know this report is something we're advising the board, and we'll accept this report. Is there anything else?
I thank Pia for the report, and I think we've been working on some things and to address turnover, and we're going to target a little bit more for next year.
Good.
And so I think it's a good report, and it's a way for us to stay on top of things. And I just have one other thing I need to remind the board that you have received Robert's evaluation, and for us to turn that around in 2 weeks. And I thank those that already completed those. So we have some that's already completed those. So please complete his.
Half your colleagues aren't making eye contact with you.
I see him looking down.
Yeah.
You've already sent that out, his evaluation?
You didn't get it?
No, I did.
Okay.
That was part of it.
Okay, all right, we go. I was looking at him like.
But Dorothy, we talked about that.
Dorothy, thank you for that reminder, and Pia, thank you for
Okay,
your
thank you,
report.
sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
All right, that will now move us to agenda item number 9, which is a consent agenda. It was provided previously. If you have any discussion, I think we'd certainly entertain taking it out, discussing it. If not,
Do I have to yank something to ask a question?
no, you do not.
I wanted to ask Sharon where correctional health fits in on the graphs for, I'd have to get it. It's under the financial report.
Yes, so the county contracts would be an outpatient visit, I believe.
So, but on the graphs where it shows each service line, I mean, there's ENT, I couldn't find where correctional health fit in on the number of visits.
Does this relate to something I can answer after the board meeting and we can
Yeah,
look
I
at
just
your
didn't-
graph?
Yeah.
Or I can come over and talk to you right now, one of the two.
No,
I'm
no,
not
no, no,
sure. Okay.
I'll ask you, that's fine. Thank you. Where is it?
Okay, I got you. All right. There being any other discussion regarding the consent agenda? If not, I'd entertain a motion. I have a motion by Mr. Wynn, a second by Mr. Montgomery. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Thank you very much. Agenda item number 10 is our report of general counsel. Mr. Adams?
Mr. Chairman, only report I have would be that for the month of November 2019, there were 24 contracts negotiated on behalf of the district under 500,000. That list has been posted on your board portal. If you got any questions, give us a call.
Any questions for legal at this time? There being none, we will pause now and go into closed session. We have 2 items, as we mentioned. Item number 7B and D for discussion and privileges. I don't think it'll take very long. We will now close open at 11:10. Let's take about a 5-minute break. We'll come right back. Thank y'all so very much. All righty, we will now reconvene in open session at 11:50. I think we'll back up and address items agenda item number 7. We'll take item B first. And I believe that, Kenny, if you would finish that presentation, please. B. It's the actual, B is consider approval of license and support agreement between Siemens and the Tarrant County Hospital District.
Absolutely. So this is the one for the Singovia Enterprise Solutions. Allows the remote processing, the expediting of the images, and also the reduced turnaround time for the providers to read those images. Also, it has the enhanced brain perfusion that we need in order to maintain and to help our stroke patients as well.
Is there any questions for Kenny at this time? If not, I'd entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move approval of item 7B as presented.
I have a motion by Mr. Montgomery, second by Mr. Zimmerman. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Kenny, thank you very much. And also, while you're there, if you'd go ahead and address agenda item number 7B, which is the purchase agreement between Siemens and the Tarrant County Hospital District.
Yes, sir, I will. Thank you. So I'm pitch hitting for my friend David Mendenhall with this one. And this is the maintenance agreement for our 2 CTs. And this is for, we negotiated for a 98% uptime, and an increase in after-hours service, as well as a guaranteed response time. And this is for locking it in for the 8 years with no increases.
Any questions for Kenny at this time? If not, I entertain a motion. I have a motion by Mr. Zimmerman, second by Mr. Montgomery. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Thank you very much. Kenny, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank y'all. Thanks for the group.
I would now go to Dr. Schrader to discuss our privileges.
Yeah, as discussed in closed session, we have the presentation of request for medical staff credentialing activity for consideration by the board. Well, I don't think I can motion.
He's got to go. I believe I heard Mrs. DeBose make a motion. I have a motion by Mrs. DeBose. I have a second by Mr. Wynn. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Thank you very much. Dr. Schrader, thank you very much. I guess as chair, 2 things I'd just like to remind the board. We do have a board holiday party coming up Thursday evening, the 19th. Certainly look forward to you and your guests being there. Suzanne's done a marvelous job, as always, in staff in preparation of that, and she'll be sending reminders out to everyone. So therefore, I'd like to wish this board and your families and what staff members are here a very, very Merry Christmas. I'm going to take one moment here to say something personal. I want to congratulate our new officers, Chuck and Dorothy. Roger's not here today. I want to congratulate you with your election. I also looked at the calendar. My official duties as chair will run through 12/31. I want to thank this board for allowing me the opportunity to chair this board the last 3 years. I'm not here to give some long. Look what we all together accomplished a lot, and I appreciate y'all's support this last 3 years. So again, to y'all, I say thank you, and Bill, to you and the staff there, and Robert, to the 6,700 employees of this district that really are JPS. They've done a marvelous job, and I appreciate that, Robert. So again, saying that, we'll look forward to, as of right now, I think our first meeting is scheduled for January the 23rd, which will be our first round of committee meetings in January, and we'll have our first. Is that the first one? The 9th, yeah. We will have committee meetings in January. Our first official board meeting will be in February. DT, I'll also tell you, thank you for your service as secretary to this board as our tenure runs through 12/31. So saying all that, and with no additional business to come from the board, we stand adjourned. Thank y'all.